You're inside a shelter made of mammoth bones and hide, and it's the middle of an Ice Age winter. There are no trees for 100 miles in any direction, and the temperature outside hasn't gone above freezing in months. There's no thermostat. There's no down jacket. There's no emergency heater if the fire goes out tonight. And somewhere in that freezing dark, one of your ancestors looked at a dying fire and understood something with total clarity. If it goes out and no one can start another one, everyone in this shelter is dead by morning. This is the story of what ancient humans actually did to survive winters that killed the unprepared without hesitation. Not survival show tips, not a cozy how they stayed warm explainer. The real, sometimes brutal choices that kept a fragile, hairless, tropical evolved animal alive through ice ages that lasted thousands of years. And here's the thing nobody mentions. For most of human history, winter wasn't an inconvenience. It was the single deadliest season there was. And staying alive through it took some genuinely dark, resourceful decisions. Here's a real question worth asking before any of the clever solutions. A hairless, tropical evolved animal with no natural fur, no claws, and skin that starts losing dangerous amounts of heat within minutes of exposure. How does that animal end up living through ice ages at all? The honest answer is that almost nothing about surviving an ice age winter was natural. Every single piece of it had to be invented, taught, and repeated correctly, year after year. Or the group didn't make it to spring. Start with fire, because nothing else on this list works without it. Here's a question worth sitting with. Modern humans didn't invent fire. So how far back does keeping it alive actually go? Evidence from Qesem Cave in Israel, studied by archaeologists Rand Barkai and Avi Gopher, shows controlled, repeated fire use going back roughly 300,000 years. Hearths used again and again in the same spot, not a one-time lucky spark. That fire wasn't just warmth. It was cooking, protection from predators, and the only light source for 16 hours of winter darkness a day. Losing it wasn't an inconvenience. It was often a death sentence for the whole group, which is why someone was assigned to keep it alive around the clock, every single night, for months at a time. Relighting a fire from nothing, without matches, without a lighter, using only friction or a struck spark on a dry tinder, could take a skilled person several minutes under good conditions. In a wide-out blizzard with numb fingers, it might not be possible at all. Which is exactly why the coal was guarded like the most valuable object the group owned, because it was. Shelter mattered just as much as fire, and the smartest move wasn't building upward, it was digging down. Many Ice Age groups built semi-subterranean shelters, dug partly into the ground. Because packed earth holds heat far better than open air. And because the ground itself blocks the wind that does most of the real damage in a winter storm. Even snow was useful this way. Packed snow traps air in a way that makes it a surprisingly effective insulator, the same principle later used in built igloos. Here's the second real question worth asking. Why bother building anything at all when you could just build a bigger fire? The answer is that a fire radiates heat outward and upward, most of it lost to open air within a few feet. While a well-built shelter traps a person's own body heat alongside the fire's, multiplying its effect. Shelter wasn't a backup plan. It was the actual technology doing most of the work, and fire was just topping it up. Clothing was the other half of it, and here's how we even know when it started. In 2011, biologist David Reed and his team at the University of Florida studied the DNA of clothing lice. The kind that live in fabric, not hair, and calculated when they genetically split off from head lice. Their answer, roughly 170,000 years ago. Clothing lice can't exist without clothing. So that's the oldest hard estimate we have for when humans started covering their bodies instead of just growing more hair. Simple hide draped over the shoulders keeps some heat in, but it lets wind straight through. The real breakthrough was fitted, sewn clothing. And the oldest known sewing needle, made of bird bone, was found in Qesem Cave in Siberia, and dates back roughly 50,000 years. A needle means tailored sleeves, tailored hoods, layers that actually seal against the cold instead of just hanging there. At Sunghir, in Russia, excavated by archaeologist Otto Bader starting in the 1950s, burials roughly 30,000 years old were found covered in thousands of ivory beads, arranged in patterns that only make sense if they were sewn onto fitted garments, outlining sleeves, leggings, and hoods that have long since rotted away. The beads survived. The tailored Ice Age parka they were sewn onto did not. Now here's the darker part. On the open tundra, there were no forests to cut firewood from. So what did they burn? Bones. At Mezhirich, in Ukraine, archaeologists found entire dwellings built from mammoth bones roughly 15,000 years ago. And evidence shows those same bones, along with dried animal fat and dung, were burned as fuel. Bone doesn't light easily, but soaked in marrow fat it burns hot and slow, which is exactly what a group needed to get through a night that could last 18 hours. It was not a pleasant fire. Burning bone and fat produces a thick, greasy smoke that would have filled these shelters for months at a time, coating everything and everyone in soot. Warm and alive, but choking on the smoke that kept them that way. Lung damage from a lifetime of smoke exposure shows up clearly in the skeletal remains researchers have studied from sites like this. A genuinely rough trade, breathable air for survivable warmth, made worse every single winter of a person's life. Diet turned dark too. Here's a real problem hunter-gatherers ran into that most people have never heard of. Eating too much lean meat and almost nothing else can actually kill you. It's sometimes called rabbit starvation, and the mechanism is straightforward. Your liver can only process so much protein per day, and without enough fat or carbohydrate alongside it, the excess protein becomes toxic instead of nourishing. Which is why the fattiest parts of an animal, marrow, organ fat, brain, were treated as the prize, not leftover scraps. A lean haunch of meat could genuinely be less valuable in midwinter than a small handful of pure fat. Reindeer doing their part for ancient human survival by being, unknowingly, extremely generous with their bone marrow. Honestly, respect. Neanderthals, who lived through far more ice ages than modern humans ever did, had a physical head start here too. Their shorter, stockier builds held on to heat more efficiently than the taller, leaner bodies typical further south. The same basic rule that explains why Arctic mammals today tend to be compact and round rather than long and thin. Some of that same cold-adapted heritage, through interbreeding, is still sitting in the DNA of people alive today. Here's the honest, uncomfortable number underneath all of this. Archaeological evidence from Ice Age sites consistently shows high infant and childhood mortality. Likely a third or more of children not surviving their first few winters. This wasn't neglect. It was the baseline cost of keeping a hairless, tropical-built animal alive somewhere its body was never designed for. None of it worked alone, either. Groups that huddled, shared fire duty, and pooled food through a bad winter survived at far higher rates than any lone individual could have managed no matter how well equipped they were. Isolation was, in a very real sense, one of the most dangerous things a person could be in an Ice Age winter. And that's really the uncomfortable turn in this whole story. Every clever adaptation on this list, the fire discipline, the tailored clothing, the bone-fueled hearths, the fat-obsessed diet, existed because the alternative wasn't discomfort. It was death, and it took every one of these solutions working together every single winter just to keep a group alive until spring. Some of it never actually left you, either. The next time you shiver, or feel goosebumps rise on cold skin, trying uselessly to fluff fur you no longer have, that's leftover wiring from exactly this. Tens of thousands of winters your ancestors fought through using fire, bone, and fat instead of biology alone. So back to that dying fire in the bone shelter, 100 miles from the nearest tree. Someone fed it a piece of fat-soaked bone, and it caught again. And the smoke curled up through the roof. And everyone inside lived to see the thaw.